Welcome to this briefing on the role of the Sovereign Order of Malta within the context of international diplomacy and the United Nations. The Sovereign Order of Malta originated in Jerusalem almost a millennium ago, and over the centuries the order was enriched and enhanced by the great European historical powers and by the papacy, affirming its Catholic status as a lay religious order. It is now present in every continent, serving every race, gender, and religion, as well as those who have no religion. We bring the message of Christ through the practical application of personal and humble service to our lords, the sick and the poor. Until the Napoleonic Wars, we had been the rulers of what are now countries, Cyprus and Malta. And while we were denied the opportunity of claiming our lands back, the world's powers at the beginning of the 19th century chose to recognize as well as guarantee our sovereignty. We became a government in exile, in perpetuity, even though our territory is now limited to 2 small areas in Italy. And it is on the Via Condotti in the heart of Rome and on the Aventine Hills that you will find the centre of our government, where our head of state, the Grand Master, lives and works, and where our administrative infrastructure involving several hundred full-time staff operate. It is where our Foreign Minister, our Finance Minister, Minister of Health, and our Prime Minister, along with regional and desk staff, perform their functions, and it is also the seat of our governing cabinet, the Sovereign Council. Almost 30 years ago, we were granted permanent observer status at the United Nations, and we now have full-time ambassadors serving in Geneva, in Vienna, and in Rome, and here in New York. We serve alongside a network of ambassadors accredited to 113 countries. Enjoying diplomatic status enables us to more effectively conduct our international outreach, as our ambassadors, by virtue of their status, have access to the highest levels of government in those countries in which they serve. This enables us to cut through red tape to bring our concerns and sometimes our problems to those in governments around the world who can best help us help those we serve. And it gives the Order's local associations a status and access which they would not otherwise enjoy. They become adjunct members of an international sovereign entity. This is something unique in the world of international diplomacy and something that we should be truly proud of. So what about the United Nations? No matter what they say, the world needs the UN, for all its faults, because it can be a voice of reason in a world where reason is often drowned out by the bully and the demagogue. It is also one of the few remaining forums in the world where all nations have a voice, big and small nations, and where divergent views can be shared without fear or intimidation. Following COVID, the UN in Geneva and New York has been gradually restored to its former functionality, and as the world's problems and issues show no sign of diminishing, we at the Order's mission have been exceptionally active. Let me briefly highlight for you some of the areas where the Order of Malta's presence makes a difference, and where our voice joins with the community of nations. Human trafficking. This is a scourge that is engulfing humanity and destroying lives. Last year at the General Assembly, in support of the anti-trafficking organization Global Strategic Operatives, we presented the World Health Organization with a protocol to assist healthcare providers identify victims of modern slavery in hospitals, clinics, care facilities, and in emergency rooms. This is the first of its kind and is a major contribution to combating this awful problem. My special advisor on human trafficking, Debbie O'Hara-Ruskowski, who is also the CEO of Global Strategic Operatives, commented as follows.
That we decided to focus primarily on educating the healthcare systems and their providers and personnel within the systems, based on studies that the ambassador inferred, the showing 88 to 92% of all survivors seek medical care while being trafficked. We would bring the human trafficking training to each site, help them learn how to identify a suspected human trafficking victim, and then know the appropriate action to take. We had to teach a clinical paradigm shift.
Climate change. Each year, the nations of the world gather together and try to find common ground in dealing with climate change. The effects of this are felt all over the world. America, by no means, is not immune. And in preparation for COP26 and COP27, we prepared a UN Youth Dialogue on the impact of climate change, discussing how young people can and should respond. This year, following COP28, we will hold another dialogue and will discuss with a group of Catholic and other faith-based young adults their reaction to the closing statement.
Climate action needs to happen now. It is critical for the international community to step up their game, to further efforts in implementing policies relating to climate change and climate action, and drastically accelerate the transition to green and sustainable economies and move away from fossil fuels.
How do we keep human dignity at the center of our work? In other words, how do we work to heal our planet without devaluing human beings throughout the process?
I would like to draw your attention to the linkage between the climate change and education. Since education is the basic human rights that help raise people out of poverty and inequalities, as well as plays an important...
Human rights. The UN Third Committee is one of the most active and prolific of the UN committee groups, and the Order of Malta has been particularly active here. This year alone, we've delivered more than 35 interventions. The human rights of internally displaced people, care for the elderly, the sexual exploitation of children, and the increased use of torture. These are all areas where the Order of Malta has something to say. We add a humanitarian perspective to dialogue that is often more concerned with politics and grandstanding than with finding practical and workable solutions.
If we do not act now, our human rights will remain theoretical. The triple crisis of our environment, climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, all happening during our watch will have grave environmental, societal, and economic impacts on humanity.
And relief workers in providing housing, medical, and humanitarian assistance in Ukraine and in the neighbouring countries that have hosted displaced children and families.
And I reiterate that the Order of Malta is a strong supporter of your mandate, as we reject any kind of inhuman and degrading treatment or punishment.
Not all of these issues are attention grabbers, and not all of them are easy to talk about. However, we do not shy away from our role as an advocate for the sick and the poor and the marginalized. And while we may not have a large population and a landmass to call our own, we do have a national conscience and a commitment to duty and service. And yes, we have citizens. Our citizens are those who are left behind, the forgotten people in the world, those who have nowhere to go and whose voice is often unheard.
Ending poverty in all of its forms across the world for every citizen is the first of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Together, we must continue to work on the implementation of these shared goals while also ensuring the equitable distribution of resources and the right of each person to a good and fair chance at life.
Involved the Sovereign Order of Malta in the humanitarian situation in Syria, where we have been providing medical aid since the beginning of the war more than 11 years ago. Our Agency for Humanitarian Aid and Development, Malteser International, operates and supports 5 hospitals and 8 primary health centers in the Aleppo and Idlib regions.
The Sovereign Order of Malta has been upholding human dignity and caring for people in need, regardless of their origin or religion, for the last 900 years through our global medical, social, and humanitarian work.
An effective example of our own efforts in this is in northern Uganda, where a community of refugees from South Sudan has been established. To meet the housing demand, our international aid agency, Malteser International, with a local partner, Impact Building Solutions Foundation, is using agricultural waste which would otherwise have been burned to produce building material.
The UN's main organ in ensuring peace and stability in the world is the Security Council. And while the Council's limitations were revealed clearly during the Ukraine conflict, and more recently in respect of the war between Israel and Hamas, the Security Council continues to provide a forum for dialogue and for perspectives to be shared and solutions proposed and discussed. Until this year, the Sovereign Order of Malta had only been invited once to address the Security Council. But this year we have been privileged to make 4 statements, 2 of them on the Ukraine war and 2 of them on the conflict in Palestine. In September, our Grand Chancellor spoke before the Security Council and addressed the Ukraine crisis.
The bigger and stronger a world power, the more significant is the responsibility it has, not only for its own citizens, but also for those who live outside their borders, yet who rely on it for service and product and for neighborly support. Likewise, in the community of nations, might is not always right, and strong and powerful peers must exert a great influence and take more responsibility in reining in the behavior of those that transgress the norms of the UN Charter and the rules-based world that it enshrines. They should not subvert or ignore it for their own ends. Mr. President, allow me to conclude with a quotation from Pope John XXI's encyclical Pacem in Terra. Peace will be but an empty-sounding word unless it is founded on order. The order of truth, built according to justice, vivified and integrated by charity and put into practice in freedom. Surely, this is a formula which respects and anchors the UN Charter, and one which we should all subscribe to if the suffering of the Ukrainian people is not in vain.
Recalling the Sovereign Order of Malta's commitment to providing health care and support for those at risk, particularly in light of the Holy Family Hospital in Bethlehem, we made a statement in October following the devastation in Gaza, noting the suffering of innocent Palestinians, particularly women and children.
Permanent observer of the Sovereign Order of Malta to the United Nations.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, the Sovereign Order of Malta is appreciative to the Presidency of Brazil for this opportunity to speak as a neutral and non-partisan witness to the pain and suffering that has bedeviled the land in which we were founded 900 years ago. Our love of the Holy Land, sacred as it is to Jews and to Muslims, has been severely tested by the calculated violence that has recently been unleashed on so many innocent people whose only desire is to live in communities that are peaceful and prosperous, where the young can live lives of opportunity and brotherhood, not lives of poverty, hatred, or mistrust. We all know the statistics, we have heard them so often. The number of innocent Jewish children, mothers, elders, fathers, brothers,
We have seen the devastated bombing of cities and towns, the million of people displaced, the cries of Palestinian children and their parents, and the sheer hopelessness of it all. We are very much aware of the carnage and destruction that we have not seen since World War II, but of which we have had a stark reminder watching the conflict unfold in the Ukraine. The healthcare system in Gaza is under immense strain. 30% of hospitals cannot function. The rest are at breaking point. Since October 7th, there have been 143 attacks on healthcare facilities, 81 in the West Bank, affecting ambulances, compounded by physical violence to health and emergency personnel. In Gaza, 62 attacks on medical facilities have resulted in over 500 fatalities and another 500 healthcare workers injured and unable to accomplish their mission. This alongside the thousands of civilians killed and the tens of thousands injured. And the numbers go on and on, with one single question in the mind of everyone hearing a bomb exploding or anticipating their own death or injury: when will all this end? Whichever faction was responsible for, or whoever's missiles landed on the grounds of Al-Ahli Hospital, one thing is clear: it is the innocent who ultimately bear the heaviest burden. It is becoming a feature of this century that the conventional boundaries between states, so firmly embedded in our minds over the past 3 centuries, are now becoming more fluid, with the rise of new actors representing regional groups like the European Union, the Organization of American States, and the Arab League. These groups are taking on more sovereignty-like aspects, while organizations like the Red Cross enjoy broad diplomatic and immunity privileges, implying a much greater status in international law than that enjoyed by more conventional NGOs. The dilemma of the small island states, potential victims of climate change, may well create large population groups that become diaspora because their territory ceases to exist, not due to war or conflict, but because of the consequence of climate change and the environment. This will be a totally new phenomenon in international law. How the international community treats these countries in exile will be a challenge for the next generation, and it may well be that lessons can be learned and applied from the 900-year experience of the Sovereign Order of Malta, which in 1794 lost its territory, yet continues to exist under the protection of the Church and with the support and recognition of the international community, and which today enjoys a seat at the table of international consultation and decision-making, and has redoubled its efforts of service to the sick and to the poor. Thank you.